you're just a Stevie Wonder blink. I take a piss in the same sink, you wash dishes with.
Daniel Dewan Sewell, aka Danny Brown, born March 16, 1981. Today's feature is an artist I like to describe as having major crossover talent, but not enough crossover opportunity. Much of what made Danny Brown stand out was also what made him fly under the radar in his rap career. If there's one artist from his era you can describe as unique, persistent, hardworking, and confident in his ability, that would be Danny Brown. But the same uniqueness that gave him the notoriety he needed to burst onto the scene is the same that kept him in the balance between fans who appreciated that and ones turned off because it didn't fit the traditional sound you were used to and drew a strong line in the sand of either you liked it or not. There is no in-between with Danny Brown. He's old enough to remember a time when rappers were credited for their uniqueness. In fact, it was a requirement if you wanted to be one that rose above the rest in competitive eras throughout the 90s and 2000s. Nowadays, rap can seem like one big melting pot of the same ingredients added over and over, and not much about standing out or being different, but more let's all do the same style and see who could do it best or just be the latest doing it. Danny Brown was a late bloomer in becoming known officially as a rapper, spending his entire 20s pursuing the craft, showing his effort, but it created a chip on his shoulder that may have been too big not to feel resentment toward the path he had to take to finally be in the game. He released his debut album in 2010 at 29 years old, still considered an underground artist on the rise, when at the age many rappers have seen the peak of their success and most are on the decline. But his charisma, personality, style, and it factor grew to be undeniable, and timing lined up just right for the rap game to finally recognize who Danny Brown was. When you think of Detroit, he's far from what you'd expect to come from there, and far from what the masses might immediately see as a star. But over time, you understand and appreciate artists like Danny Brown more and more because they almost deserve the sun to finally shine on them, and deserve people understanding the path he had to take to be famous enough not to be able to return to normal life, but not famous enough to be considered or recognized as one of the better rap artists in the game today off things like style, technical ability, and confidence to stand out and not join the herd, in a time that's normal and lucrative. Danny Brown had the intangibles and most the elements you can teach to be a star, and his music reflected that perfectly. Still, it wasn't enough and he went overlooked and underrated for these reasons. What happened? Let's talk about it. It's your boy JC Stunted Growth Music. Let's get it, man. Take a minute to like, subscribe, and comment on who I should do next. Danny Brown is a rapper from Detroit, Michigan that knew since a child he wanted to rap. No, seriously, since a toddler, he remembers his mom reading Dr. Seuss books to him, emphasizing the rhymes that inspired a young Brown. Teachers would ask him in front of the whole class what he wanted to be, and he'd always say a rapper, which to the other kids was funny and maybe seemed impossible. Growing up in one of the toughest neighborhoods in Detroit, Brown, who was sheltered by his parents, ventured off into a whole new world of the streets when he finally got outside, and it led to him selling drugs like all his friends did. After his first run-in with the law, Danny ran from his case for 5 years until he was caught and had to serve 8 months in jail. When he came out, rap was all he had. He decided to take that seriously and was actually supposed to sign to G-Unit. But according to him, 50 Cent loved the music, just not Danny Brown's skinny jeans, and the deal fell through. Stunt number 1, the wrong era. After coming to know of Danny Brown back in the early 2010s, my initial response to his character, which is actually who I came to know him to really be, was that man, he'd be great in a different era. His originality makes you nostalgic of how rap used to be. The thing is, fans just don't or didn't appreciate it for what it was during his career. Had he found a way to break through in the 90s, they most certainly could have appreciated the artist Danny Brown is. And I use that word artist very strongly because of all the 2010s rappers that came up in that golden era of hip-hop, actually the last golden hip-hop era. Danny Brown is one of the top guys you'd go to for the experience and not just the bars. His music is like listening to a vibe. Like it or not, you know you're getting a one-of-a-kind experience, and that's all you can ask for from an artist, that they give you a true piece of how they perceive life authentically. Not some cookie cutter, fill in the artist, everyone sounds the same in rap music today. When I saw Meek Mill singing like Baby and Dirk, I knew it was over. Danny Brown, though, I'd say came up in the wrong era because the 2010s decade produced some of hip-hop's biggest stars that we remember today, and they all overshadowed Danny Brown on a mainstream level. Of course, if you go to an underground hip-hop scene and ask who they'd rather put on, Drake or Danny Brown, they'd probably say Danny Brown. But on a mainstream level, which is what really determines an artist's career during and after, financially and legacy-wise, Danny couldn't compete with all the new artists that would eventually change the game. He came up when Drake, Kendrick, J. Cole, Wiz Khalifa, Chief Keef, Young Thug, Future, 21 Savage, Travis Scott, A$AP Rocky, Meek Mill, Nipsey Hussle, I mean you name it, and the 2010s had the next era of greatness. Danny Brown fell under the radar to that mainstream greatness taking off right in front of him that gave the perception he was beneath them in artistry, when all the while, if you go listen to his albums, most those artists don't equate to the effort he put out. But in the end, again, perception is everything. And because Danny Brown wasn't an artist that had platinum, even gold recognition, he didn't get the praise and notoriety some of his peers received. Stunt number 2, late resentment. Danny Brown said in a Joe Rogan interview that he spent his entire 20s pursuing music and that for this reason or that reason, things just didn't shake for him like they typically do for rappers. Rap is a young man's sport, as I'm sure you've heard, but it's actually true. Youth is what drives music in general because the kids are the ones with the energy to make and consume the music. They are who determine what's hip for their era. They also are the ones with the inexperience, which works in their favor because their story is still being written, whereas the older you get, the more set in stone life typically becomes, and essentially you have nothing hip to say in the eyes of the youth. Of course, you have stories of wisdom and accomplishment, but hip-hop wants the train wreck, or at least the ride leading up to it, and that's what has always been popular in hip-hop culture. Because Danny didn't get his recognition throughout his 20s, he began to resent hip-hop and the fact it took him so long to get on. It made him a bit too self-conscious of how he's perceived, all the while none of his fans today care about his age, now 42 years old. Most his music focuses on the struggle of an old rapper, and it became a bit repetitive and gave him a short window of influence. He himself also admitted that he started too old, which he thinks hurt his recognition, made him bitter and less confident he could be a rapper. Has big a chip on his shoulder when he got on? I couldn't imagine a young Danny Brown getting the notoriety and hype rappers get when they are accomplished at younger ages.
I started a little too old. 30-year-old rapper is like...
Stunt number 3, remaining underground. Another huge issue with Danny Brown getting the recognition he deserves is his music has never sold like the big artists. While that matters none to the ones that strictly care about the greatness of the product, it matters in how much the industry itself pushes the artists out there, which can hurt the amount of people that get to see or hear their great music. Many fans of Danny Brown hold his 30 album as his best work of his catalog, an album that didn't even chart. An album that has one of my favorite intros of all time that perfectly captures the essence of the artist, person, and personal struggles. It leads into a lyrical masterclass of 19 songs with Brown's talent on full display. That album to me is timeless and can lyrically rival any album of the early 2010s era. But because Danny doesn't necessarily make great mainstream songs and was overlooked for being an older rapper, his work flew under the radar. You asked about Danny Brown and most would speak about his off-the-wall personality they see on social media and in the news, or his encounter with Ninja sitting on his lap and being, as he describes, overly aggressive, trying to get in his pants, while also admitting to being, quote, experimental at the time.
I was a single experimenting man at the time, but he was too aggressive.
Nevertheless, Danny Brown has a star personality and star qualities when he raps with his unique voice and talent as a writer. He just remains underground because he didn't sell much, therefore lacked promo and opportunity like bigger artists. All in all, Danny Brown still has respect. He's more than a comedic rapper known for saying and doing wild things. He actually can rap and has rapped with the best of them. He was being courted by 50 Cent. Q-Tip helped get him his deal. Q-Tip also heavily produced his 5th album. He also almost signed to Rockefeller Records. Talented artist that has genuine personality and great music, but for these reasons, he remains overlooked and underrated. Salute, much respect. It's your boy JC Stunted Growth Music, and I'm out.